where sustainability people get lost in the business world is that they're perceived as being kind of moral highwaymen that's trying to push the business away from profit, rather than seeing sustainability people as breaking down silos between different departments to maximize value all around. I think there is a perception reality gap of what the sustainability role represents.
Welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast exploring how to balance profit with purpose in an increasingly complex world. I'm Charlie Martin, your host and founder of TrueMark. And before we get into this week's episode, I'd just like to say a big thank you to our podcast studio host, Easy Fares. In terms of our article this week, we're going to be unpacking the piece titled, "Is the Chief Sustainability Officer Becoming Irrelevant? It's Debatable," which asks whether the CSO is gaining strategic power or losing relevance as sustainability moves into core functions. I'm absolutely thrilled to say that my guest today is a real expert in this area, Amelia Woodley, C-suite ESG Director, Government ESG Advisor, and Sustainability Leader who has embedded net zero, governance, and commercial growth into the heart of business strategy. Amelia, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
Thank you for the invite, Charlie.
Now, I've very broadly and briefly introduced you and your work. For those of our listeners of yours who are immediately jumping over to LinkedIn going, right, let's find Amelia's profile and check out what she's been up to. Can you give us just a flavour as to what your most recent work sort of is involved and what your areas of focus are?
So I've got over 20 years experience in sustainability. So kind of I'd call myself an old timer, and been through all the ups and downs of the sustainability journey. I've spent probably the last 10 to 15 years working with organizations to design sustainability strategies that are very purpose-led and impactful, embed them across their organization so they can deliver their sustainability goals. But most recently, a lot of work I've been doing is around harmonizing sustainability objectives to business growth, value creation, growing revenue, reducing risk. So really taking that business angle, and that was a core role that I did in my C-suite position. And it took a really different lens to what is the value that the CSO role provides to the organization. And as an individual, you know, I'm very passionate about sustainability, people and planet. So how can we balance the profit element to it as well?
Very good. So we had you as sort of an insider, if you like, within that C-suite, fighting the good fight for, you know, perhaps some of these other less directly commercial considerations, although your point is that ultimately it's about sustainability becoming a commercial consideration. Right. Before we get into more of you and the here and the now, and I want us to go back and understand exactly what's inspired you to ultimately do, you know, what you've just described in terms of your career. Like, take us back to any of those kind of formative experiences so you can share with us that you've sort of, on reflection, are quite pivotal in inspiring Amelia to do what she's done.
So I've always been from the environmental sciences background. It was part of my degree. I'm a geography and geologist by training. So love of the natural world and the natural environment. So kind of went into that career, started off doing lots of work around contaminated land remediation. So, you know, taking big, dirty industrial sites and cleaning them up and handing them over. And the biggest iconic project I worked on was the 2012 Olympics. And, you know, that's the biggest brownfield cleanup that we had in Europe. And what an amazing opportunity to be part of that. I think for me, my purpose has always been around how can organizations become profitable? You know, I love business as much as I love sustainability, and businesses are here to make money. I think you have to be like really super honest about that. They're not on a philanthropic journey, but an organization needs to use resources from the planet. It needs people to work for them. It needs people to sell to, and it's within communities. And if we go back to, you know, I go back to my original training of what are the three principles of sustainability, is people, planet and profit. And I think sustainability professionals have been very heavy on planet and people, not so comfortable on the profit conversation. And businesses have been very heavy on the profit and maybe not so willing to have the planet people conversation. So, my core training is, how do we balance those three up? And as I went through businesses and saw the different tensions and the different priorities, for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment of businesses aren't going to go away. They're not going to stop making profit. So how can I be a driving force in allowing them to grow in a way that protects the planet and is more positive for society?
I'm going to play the devil's advocate question with this because I think it's really important. But you mentioned business is here to stay, profit is here to stay. It's the capitalist system that we all kind of rely on for, the living standards that we enjoy and much of the modern lived experience that we have at play. Is that though truly sustainable? I think there was that that stat that we're currently using. Is it 1.8 Earths? Is the solution to, and I'm starting with a big broad question here, Amelia, but is the solution to the problem of, over utilization of the finite resources that we have available, is the solution to that every business would continue to operate with profit in mind, but ultimately become more sustainable? Or is there something more inherently transformational and revolutionary that we need in order to not find ourselves exploiting the planet in that way?
You think of how businesses are set up and operated, it's short-term returns. So how do I generate my profit on a, at least half yearly basis, report back to the city? What's my share price? What dividends? So it's short-paced churn.
Yeah.
That works completely opposite to how sustainability materializes itself. Mm-hmm. It's a longer term investment. Your return on investment takes time. The payback takes time. So if you look at the way that businesses are fundamentally structured from a financial point of view, it doesn't work from a sustainability point of view either, which is why it's very interesting when we go down the road of transition planning, because what transition planning is trying to do is get the business to look in the medium to long term in terms of resiliency, revenue growth, or potential risk to the business. So, working in commercial organizations, you've got that tension. So then it becomes really important that in that system in which you work, which has been around for a very long time, and if you go back to the work that Paul Pullman did with Unilever, he always talked about, we can't deliver sustainability if we're looking through a short-term window. We've got to try and readdress that balance. You throw in at the minute, Charlie, where we are as a society and a world, economic shocks, geopolitical tensions, high inflation. Businesses are just bunkered down short-term in a survival mode, and they can't think longer. And the sustainability can metaphorically gets kicked down the road again and again. And after so many years, I've seen that can get kicked. But, it's like compound interest. It grows, but this time it would be compound debt. So I think with organizations, they're so focused on the short term that that message is quite difficult. And that's where the CSOs come in and try and turn that sustainability narrative into a commercial outcome in the short, medium and long term.
And isn't that the point? I was so pleased that you mentioned that, because isn't it, and we're going to talk a little bit about this when we talk about the article today, but that short term, how does sustainability equate to financial commercial return in the short term? Is that almost the starting point for CSOs to go get real and get into what can be positioned as a short-term financial gain realized by said initiative?
Absolutely. You look at an organization when they do their annual accounts, they are looking 12 months behind. What was my 12-month performance? A transition plan is asking an organization to project its growth and revenue 10, 15 years in advance. That makes finance and accountants really, really uncomfortable. They're like, we don't know what those numbers are. And if we put those numbers out into the city, we will be held to those numbers. So you're asking them to operate in a way that they've never operated before and probably don't fully understand the reasons why they need to report in the way that they are. Now, don't get me wrong, these regulations are going to be brilliant for the sustainability fraternity. It's going to change the thinking. But right now, what you've got to look at, particularly when the world is so volatile and businesses are competing with some serious sort of challenges, what are my quick wins? How can I reduce cost? How can I grow revenue? Get that right, then you can think longer term. Now, you look at some investors, they're pension fund investors, they're looking up to 2100 because they need to make sure that that investment that they put in that organization from a pension point of view is safe and secure. So I think the CSO has to get realistic and say, right, how do I lose the battle to win the war? Because it is a long-term strategic war game. So what things do I need to do and flex and win or be willing not to win to get me to where I want to be going forward? And the way, Charlie, I've always operated when I've worked in organizations is putting them 2 to 3 years ahead of the curve. Now, that's really uncomfortable for business because they might say, we don't, our competitors, Amelia, they're here. Why do we need to be out there? Because that's human instinct, isn't it? To stay with your pack. But actually, what I'm doing is getting them to a point where they're prepared for the opportunity that presents itself. And I know from my experience that those opportunities do come within the 2 to 3 year time frame. You just have to hold that business through that uncertainty and say, it will arrive. And when it arrives, you are going to be prepared and you are going to outpace your competitor in that as well.
How do you, because I think what's fascinating with that, the word that just comes to mind is courage. Like, is that what it boils down to a lot with this? That it is about, yes, having the forecasting in place to understand the positive outcome that could be realized by doing this, but actually just fundamentally having leaders who have courage and conviction in staying the course. Is it as simple as that? That human trait is core and key to delivering this? I
think if you're going to go into the profession of sustainability, you've got to be pretty resilient and tenacious. Because businesses have naturally over time pushed against it. May not have been, not because they don't want to do it, it's just not maybe a corporate priority. Now it's, I look back on my career sort of 10 years ago, no one wanted sustainability people in the room at all. So that narrative has shifted, and I think that's really positive. I think in the negativity of the world, it's really important to see the progress that's been made. I think it's a combination of two things, Charlie. I think you have to be courageous and you have to have conviction. You have to have confidence in what you believe, but you have to be really smart about where you put your effort. So for me, what I've always done is look at, what are the investors telling me? What signals are they giving me? Things like disclosures. You read these endless disclosures and, I reflect back over a few years. Years ago, it was net zero. So I was like, okay, focus your effort on net zero. Then it was modern slavery and human rights. Right, now pivot to that. Then it was nature positive. Right, we need to do something on that. So rather than eating the elephant whole and going into a C-suite and say, we've got 15 sustainability risks and things we've got to do, you go in and say, right, investors care about this. And this is why. The customers care about this also. So don't worry about the other things for now. We can put them to the side. Just fix that problem. And then once you fix that problem, let's move on to the other one. Because, executives have a lot to balance. So it can be overwhelming when sustainability people come in and, there are so many components of ESG in particular. Yeah. So I think you have to be smart around, where do I focus my effort for my maximum return of investment?
I think it's fascinating you brought that up because I had Charlie Bingham on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was so wonderfully honest about Bingham's and how he started it in 1993. I'll tell you a quick story because I think it is interesting. So he started the business in 1993, management consultant beforehand, didn't want to work for anybody else, wanted to start a business. In 1993, he said the only thing that he considered when it came to his first meals that he started producing was that he didn't want to use ultra-processed foods. But he didn't even know at the time that it was, I didn't want to use ultra-processed foods. What he knew is, I want all of my meals to be made from ingredients that anyone could find in their, in their kitchen. And that was really important. But he then said, over the years, as you just alluded to, there's been animal welfare, there's been packaging issues, there's been, it's just one thing after another presenting itself. And what he said, I've never lost sight of the fact that we are a commercial entity looking to grow and build our business to deliver great quality food experiences, something like that in terms of the goal. But that we can continue to grow and evolve and develop as a business, addressing these things as best we can as they arise. And it comes back to your point earlier about people, planet, profit. I almost think there's a problem, if I'm honest, with the order. It's profit, people, planet, or planet, profit. So I think that really lends itself to.
But then
what
without
you've just
the
described.
planet, there is no business. There's no profit, is there? Because you're pulling natural resources. So it's, and that's why I keep going back to those 3 Ps when people talk about sustainability in business. Profit has always been part of the sustainability discussion, always been there. It's just never really been brought out, and they are mutually dependent upon each other. You know, if you consume too much and resources run out, then how does your business survive? You look at, you know, lithium mining and batteries, you know, there's an infinite availability. So if that availability runs out, then that has a material risk to your business. So they kind of, they're interlocked with each other as well.
Do you think, though, that individual businesses have that frame of reference?
No business is here on a moral high ground. No business should be skewing their model wholly or predominantly towards environment and social justice, unless you are a particular business that's mission is that.
Yes.
Now, you think about the sustainability debate, businesses think, not all of them, I'm just going off my years of experience, that we are trying to push them down some moral high road. And actually what we're trying to do is balance the scales. Yeah. So if you're going down that road where you're over-investing in environment and social sustainability at the detriment of your profit, that isn't a financially stable business, unless we said, you know, that's mission. And this is where I guess where sustainability people get lost in the business world is that they're perceived as being kind of moral highwaymen.
Yes.
That's trying to push the business away from profit, rather than seeing sustainability people as breaking down silos between different departments to maximize value all around. We all want the same thing. We want the business to grow.
Yeah.
But we want to deliver the sustainability objectives at the same time. We don't want one to push against the other. And sometimes they do. And sometimes you have to lose a battle on it. But I think there is a perception reality gap of what the sustainability role represents.
And as if by magic, you perfectly segued us in to discussing the article this week. So, Amelia, would you mind just starting by giving our listeners and viewers just like a bit of a flavour, a bit of an introduction to the piece and kind of what it covers?
Yeah, so the piece was really interesting. So thank you very much for sharing it. It was really, I think, relevant in this particular time of what is the purpose of the Chief Sustainability Officer. And it gave a really interesting for and against debate. You know, I think at the moment, the Chief Sustainability Officer is in a real inflection point. You know, I think back on my career years ago, you didn't really have CSOs. Then sustainability became very popular 5 years ago. I equated Charlie to being the cool kid. Finally, at school, taken a while. So they popped up everywhere. We've seen a real shift in that narrative. Now, the point of the article was, is that CSO role scaling back because it's been embedded? Or actually, is that CSO role more relevant, more than ever in organizations in terms of all of the things they've got to manage from a regulation and disclosure risk perspective? You know, I think the things that I pulled out from it and sort of reflecting on for and against, you know, the CSO role, I don't think is going away. I think you still need a strategic role. What was interesting was the point around the embedment, that are they scaling back because sustainability is being embedded in organizations, I don't think I've seen many companies that have fully embedded sustainability within their business. I don't necessarily think that is the reason why there is the scale back. There's lots of tough politics at the moment. There's lots of economic challenges which are moving those roles slightly out of the business. But if you look at where we are now, as a society, as going back to my point earlier, it's very fragile. There's economics, politics, tensions all around the world. You've got inflation. Businesses are really struggling to maximize value, and then they've got to look at all of the sustainability elements. They've got to comply with regulation, legislation, disclosures. You've got investors still asking, you've got customers still expecting it. So you need that CSO to manage that short-term fragility.
Yeah.
Now, these roles are typically strategists, innovators. They keep the wheels moving on the bus. They pull down the silos. They work across the business to maximize the value. Now, you take those roles away and you focus on either compliance or reporting. There's only so far reporting will get you. If you're not strategizing and innovating constantly, and what I've noticed around the sustainability arena at the minute is it's not static, it's constantly moving. Regulation is still coming out. We've just had the IFRS regulations come out. There's a huge shift to the way that you financially report. So you take out those people that can see the lie of the land and make all of the strategic decisions and work with the innovation, and you focus on reporting, then you're not going to be able to tick those boxes in a couple of years. So, is it relevant anymore? I still believe it is relevant. I think it's more relevant than it ever has been, particularly because ESG is such a material risk now. It never used to be. It was, the days of like CSR, nice thing to do. Now we're talking about climate change. We're talking about extreme weather, the impact that has financially. You look at the cacao industry, how they had all those commodity shocks around the nature risks that they were prepared for. You've got the rise of AI. Now, that's not just from an environmental impact, but there's such a social risk to AI. Information that goes in AI is not verified. It's, you wouldn't put out an annual account without having an auditor to check your numbers. Yet AI can pump any information out. So from a social perspective, there's huge risks around that. Now, organizations, regardless of whether the CSO is there or not, are still going to have to manage those issues. So that's why my belief is that role is more important than it ever has been.
Although, just again, play devil's advocate a little bit with this. So I had a conversation. This was very early on in the Responsible Edge. So do apologize to the interviewee because they had to struggle with me asking terrible questions. But Dax Lovegrove, who was previous head of sustainability at Sainsbury's, I think, and Jimmy Choo and Versace. So some interesting different areas there. But he described how when he takes on a new CSO role, that he kind of views himself as working towards making himself redundant within the role within 3 years. And like how, and I don't know whether or not I didn't ever ask him whether or not that means that he then thought that a CSO role should not be maintained and that they should then just move to some sort of, sustainability management, perhaps team of some description. But from his perspective, it was very much like, I then need to get out and then go into a new environment to then inspire a way of thinking and a way of doing as a sort of a clean slate. Is that, in your experience, is that a good way of viewing kind of CSOs, that they kind of need to go in, have their impact, and then allow someone else to take on the longer term implementation? Or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're at that level, there's a cyclical nature to your tenure anyway. The way I've always looked at sustainability, so what I've done over my career is go into organizations that are either sustainability laggers, or they might not have anything. And
blank sheet.
Yeah, which is, I do that because that's a personal challenge. I love it. And I will spin them into sustainability leaders within no less than 3 years. Now, I call that building the sustainability house. And then once the house is built, then you hand the house keys over to the housekeepers. Now, that's because I know that what my passion is going in and creating things as opposed to ticking things over. I think, so I do agree with that. I think that's kind of is that a personal preference to working style? Maybe. I think at the moment with all of the shifts in the regulations and disclosures, there's so much coming down the horizon. And going back to the point I made earlier, I don't believe it's fully embedded in organizations. What I've seen recently, Charlie, is organizations say, well, we've got this strategy. We wrote the strategy 3 years ago when everyone was writing strategies, but we don't know how to embed it. It's not operationally geared into the business. So the CSO really is needed until that business is fully integrated. But then who does the strategic horizon scanning in the future? Because as I said before, disclosures and regulations, they're not black and white. They're not static. They're moving all the time. So then who is keeping an eye on where the business is going, what the risks of the business are, what opportunities are there as well either. So, and, a provocative, I guess, question back. No organization, Charlie, would go out and say that they wouldn't invest in health and safety, because it's morally wrong and commercially damaging. Yet organizations are okay to say that they don't need to invest as much in sustainability right now because we can't afford to do the right thing.
Is that because our regulations around sustainability have just not got the teeth?
Possibly. I mean, I think there's been more regulation than there ever has been before in the sustainability world. 10 years ago, there wasn't half of the stuff that we've got now. I'll just give you my personal view, because it's something I debate a lot, because when you think about the sustainability agenda, as I said, people think we're moral highwaymen. But actually keeping people safe and not injured and alive at work is also a moral imperative and your moral responsibility as an organisation. So no one wants to cause someone harm, okay? But is the whole debate around sustainability and climate change just too intangible for people to see? If someone gets injured at work, you can see it, it's there.
There's an immediacy to it.
Correct. Yeah. But, is the world going to increase temperature by 3 degrees at 2050? Don't know, maybe. I might not be in that business at that point. So I think the sustainability agenda suffers because it's so intangible, but it has equal moral weighting to health and safety. Yet the commercial argument to it isn't as strong.
Where you've seen sustainability, or where you've seen a CSO in particular, like really well supported, like and enabled to kind of implement and embed sustainability at the heart of an organization, like what do those conditions look like? Like what influences that context?
So I think the CSO has to have backing from the chief executive officer. And there's a reason why I say that. CSO sits in a lot of different departments, and we've debated, where the CSO sits. So it kind of defines where the business perceives that agenda. When you think of a chief sustainability officer, they have to sit across a matrix organization. So they've got to embed into marketing, engineering, HR, supply chain, customers, etc., etc. There's not many roles that look after every department apart from a chief executive. Okay. So that's why they need the backing of the chief executive, because that role is actually spanning there isn't one business function that you wouldn't go into as a chief sustainability officer. Yeah. Because I think the challenge of the narrative and the story and maybe the moral hangover that it has, it does need that leadership support, because the CEO sets the tone of the business and people follow that tone. So if the CEO is supportive of this is important to my organization, it's an important component part, it's balanced decision making, you need to do this as much as you do other things, then people will generally follow. If it's not got that backing, then the CSO, depending on their personality and their experience, if they've got good business savvy and they can speak a good business language and they've got excellent people skills, I'm finding these roles, you've got to be like psychological ninjas and master negotiators, and because you're having to convince people to do something that fundamentally they probably don't want to do. So you need to have a person that, in the absence of having that backing, can be tenacious enough to wicket roll their stakeholders to work for them. I've seen, I've worked in lots of different reporting lines in my time. But the time I worked under the CEO was the easiest for me, because I knew that I had their backing and they understood why I was doing what I was doing from a strategic business perspective, as opposed, for example, if you put it in finance, then they'll only see it through a reporting and regulation perspective.
Which is hence why, and I think that's, when I read the article, that was what it seemed to me that was sort of the glaring hole in the idea that sustainability, if embedded across in a whole organization, then essentially these heads of and chiefs of various different areas can essentially apply sustainability principles to their own role. And then you kind of get a collective movement towards sustainable outcomes for the organization as a result. I just thought you're spot on. I thought it would, like, that siloed approach of sustainability being factored in or thought in from a finance perspective, from a legal perspective, from a comms and marketing perspective. You're creating a very disjointed approach, which loses a lot of the opportunity for some of the biggest, most positive outcomes that an organization can experience as a result of investing in this area. What do you see the future of kind of the sustainability profession more broadly? Like, how is it going to evolve when it comes to, the way that organizations build their teams and build their departments, etc.? Are you hopeful that we're going to see sort of standalone sustainability teams with this kind of empowerment from the very top, or are you slightly more pessimistic in terms of what's going to happen next?
I wish I had a crystal ball. It's a good question. I don't actually know. What I will say in my career is sustainability has gone up and down in popularity.
Yeah.
It always has done. And I've never really been too concerned about that. I think what we're seeing now, as I go back to the point of being, I joke about it being a cool kid in school, it was a meteoric rise, and with it has been quite a meteoric descent as well. So I think there's optics on that. Nothing's changed. It's still, gone up and down, but I think the up has been bigger and the down has been bigger.
Yeah.
I think it will come back. I think what's happening in the minute in the world around economics and politics and companies, either scaling back for political reasons. You see what's happening in America and how organizations don't want to say too much. Over here, it is economically tough. So businesses are making short-term decisions, which I understand. But those material risks won't go. And I do believe it will come back. I think it's a shame. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the skills that CSOs have, right? They're strategists and innovators. They can work across every single organization and redesign systems to shift towards sustainable outcomes. They have to have so many level of business skills. They have to have excellent leadership and people skills as well. And sometimes I think the role is underrated because they're pigeonholed into being an SME. So, we need to talk about sustainability. Let's talk to the CSO. But what the CSO doing is setting strategy, innovating, doing regulation reporting, creating brands, training and culture programs, and actually I think that role is underrated and is not seen for the business skills that it does have. I think we're moving into this place where you are moving from strategy to embedment. Embedment is so fundamentally hard. And when I look at the journey I've had around embedment, the CSO is like the conductor of an orchestra. It brings all of the parts together. And if you don't have the conductor, you're not playing in harmony with each other. And when I look at the embedment piece, for example, that I've done over many, many years and many, many companies, I'm going in and out connecting dots with different departments, as well as creating training and culture change programs to bring people on that journey, get them really excited and impassioned that they can independently make decisions without me. If you have people siloed in departments, you don't get that cross-fertilization.
Yeah, I think with the pitch of the article being the question of whether or not the CSO's role is essentially redundant, I think the way you've positioned it, Amelia, is that it certainly isn't. And I think you also struck upon something really important during this conversation, which is that, you know, the CSO, a good CSO, is like, from a skill set, is just a multifaceted individual with, and then from a values perspective, some of the best values that you're going to be looking for in terms of resilience, in terms of, you know, ability to be able to coordinate and collaborate with people and having conviction and courage, etc. It's like, you know, we're building a picture where it's like, well, if you weren't going to appoint a CSO, like, look at what you'd be missing out on in terms of having a positive influence on your organization across the board.
Absolutely. And I think for the sustainability community as well, you know, it's for them to recognize that they have all these skills. You know, they might not know that, they might be doing these things day to day, but actually they have a huge skill set to offer, both from a technical, leadership and, you know, kind of people value perspective. And, you know, I jest with people in my profession and say, I think CSOs are the next CEOs, Charlie. So we watch this space. Maybe that might be the future.
Oh, well, I love that. I love that. And we're going to come on to your magic wand in a minute, but I think that's a lovely, and a well-observed suggestion, really, in the sense that you can really see that empathetic, aware, holistic perspective, sort of driven people, you know, CSOs are that within organizations.
And running a business that balances people, planet and profit.
I think you've given us our headline for the show, Amelia. That was brilliant. I mentioned the magic wand, so let's finish there. If I was to hand you a magic wand, you change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I think the old antiquated view that sustainability costs or is a drag to the bottom line. I've been in the industry long enough to see that it's grown revenue, it's reduced risk, it's made businesses resilient, it's enhanced their reputation. So for me, you know, one of the things that I've been doing as an individual is changing how I talk about it. I can't count on my hand, because I wouldn't have enough fingers, the amount of times I've sat in discussions with sustainability just costs money. We know it doesn't. All the evidence out there shows that it doesn't. So if I had a magic wand, it would be to dispel that myth.
I'm following up on that and giving you a practical insight for anybody else that's listening out. What are, in terms of language and use of language, what are now the absolute like no-go terms and phrases that, in light of what you've just described, you just say, I'm never using that phraseology again?
So I think ESG is highly politicized.
Okay. So that one, we got rid of that.
We got rid of that one. That was a term coined in the financial sector.
Yeah.
I think, I try not to talk about sustainability. What I talk about is my 4R framework. Does it grow revenue? Does it reduce risk? Does it make it more resilient? And does it enhance or destroy my reputation? So I don't section it off as into something separate. There's this sustainability thing over here that we've got to do and fit it into the business. It's like, how can we just ingrain it in the business and you know, drop the acronyms and the buzzwords. You know, I kind of, as much as, you know, you don't want to do it because it's something you're passionate about and you don't, you know, you shouldn't have to. I think at the moment it's just this thing on the side and we've just got to be more business speak.
So it would be so cool to be able to track the decisions that are made within an organization. So not within the sustainability department, but in my head was, you know, the brand team or whatever, to be able to identify for people where they have made decisions that would traditionally have sort of factored in consideration of sustainability. so that people actually started to learn, like you're already thinking about reputation, reward, risk, resilience. You're already doing the thinking, and look at the decisions that you've made and what went into it. That, in another phrase, could be sustainability. Do you know what I mean? Because I imagine that's core to just good business decision making.
And to be honest, a lot of them are doing that. So when you go into teams and you start talking about it, a lot of that kind of engagement is you're actually doing it. You're asking that question in supply chain. And they say, am I? Yeah, you are. You're already doing it. It's not this monster in the lair that you need to go in and drag out. It's quite simple. And even, Charlie, on the training programs that I've designed and run, people went in quite anxious, particularly when they were getting like an exam at the end of it. But they came out and said, it's not that complicated. And then they were really proud that they got a qualification. So I think in the terms of like, going back to your point of what language you should get rid of, like acronyms, they're a killer for people that don't understand that world.
And almost, and I'm going to suggest as my final point, but almost then, coming full circle back to this article, suggesting is the role of the Chief Sustainability Officer ultimately redundant? Like maybe we need to think about the phraseology we use when we refer to the role itself. Like maybe, as you say, sustainability itself is a tainted term, and we need to come up with something new, but something that ultimately doesn't become tainted itself.
Absolutely.
Here.
Once you think outside podcast.
Yeah, in fact, anybody that's got any thoughts, anybody's got any comments on what we could refer to a CSO being moving forward, then leave it in the comments. Amelia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a great discussion.
Pretty fun. And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Amelia Woodley for joining me on today's show. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the mark of trusted communications. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.